Are we ready? Yeah. So the new Tinel meeting, the fourth one. I guess some of you have been here already, some of you weren't. But basically, this is an idea of ours to have regular meetups at our office. So we can just relax, chit-chat about different subjects and stuff like that. So basically, means living room in Dalmatian slang. So this is because we want you to feel at home. So just a little recap of the previous meetings. So we first had Pavel talking about building a business with open source. Later, on the second Tinel, we had Nemanja talking about design as a beautiful error. And the last one was Harry Roberts talking about speeding up your applications. Basically, we had 3 different talks covering business or development areas, and we will continue to do so in future. So far, over 130 people visited our meetups, and we drank 500 beers, ate 30 pizzas, and 6 cakes. So that's impressive. But all this wouldn't be possible without our sponsors. We have Pivnica Plava Laguna as our pizza partner, Barba as our beer partner, Biberon Cakes for cakes, and Startup Hire for string partner. So, are you guys ready for Tinel number 4? We have Ryan Beaver, the country singer from America. No, actually, we have a different Ryan Beaver here. He's a Symfony developer from Core Symfony team. He's also a US office head for KMP Labs and writer for kmpuniversity.com. And also, last week, his workshop on Flex was the highest rated one at the summer camp conference in Robin. So this is him. And just, you can follow us on meetup.com and Facebook. And just today, you grab a beer, enjoy, ask some questions, learn something new, and that's basically it. And now, give it up for Ryan.
Want to take your computer out? I have this up here. No, I had the same one. Thank you. Alright. Yes! It's great when there are no technical difficulties. Yet. So far, so good. Alright, let me steal this. I'm going to take my shoes off. This is a thing. I don't know if it's because I get nervous and then I get in front and I have to take my shoes off. It originally happened when I was on a wooden stage and I had shoes on, so I felt like I was like clunk, 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 clunk. So I kicked the shoes off. Now it's a tradition. That picture of Ryan Weaver with the cowboy hat, no one has ever found that before and brought that up. That is actually a real person. He is more famous than I am, so no matter how good I am at programming, there's always a cowboy that's more famous than me. And for a long time, we actually lived in the same city. We both lived in Nashville. So I wasn't even the most famous Ryan Weaver in my zip code, in my city.
Are you friends?
We're not friends. Actually, good question. I've never met him, but I want to. Yeah. I kind of want him to become really famous. That would be kind of cool. Okay, so we are going to talk about Symfony Flex. I'm very happy to be here. This was an accident. I was at a conference last week, and I was already coming to Split, and so the guys from Locastic said, "Do you want to talk?" And I was like, "Yes, yes, cool, that would be great." And then they said, "There's going to be beer," and I was like, "Okay, now definitely yes." Whoa. There we go. Okay, so that was a great introduction. So you guys already know about me. My main job is writing for Camp University. And most importantly, I see I'm running out of the range. Yes! Most importantly, I'm the husband of the much more talented and lovely Leanna, who is 2 kilometers from here, but she is probably putting our monster baby to sleep. Let's see, where is our monster baby? There we go.
This is off camera. Watch out.
Oh, that's true. In 20 years, he'll watch this, and he'll be like, "I was a monster?" This is my 11-month-old son. This is a few months ago, but he is also here 2 kilometers away, hopefully being nice to mom and going to sleep. There's some more. Right, I have a son, so I get to show some photos. Here's him looking confused, and this is really the true picture of Beckett. Yeah, that is the Beckett I know. He's making life very interesting. Okay, I'm actually going to just hit this. Okay, so how many people here are Symfony developers? Okay, good. How many people have at least used Symfony a little bit? Okay, great. So there's not everyone, but it's like maybe half the people are at least Symfony developers. So there's something for everyone. So we'll talk about Symfony 2.0 first. This was introduced maybe 7-8 years ago, and it was a huge step in PHP. It was the first framework that gave us dependency injection, the first time that we could develop correctly in object-oriented code. It gave us the compiled service container, which is a fancy way of saying it allowed us to write really good code and have it be really, really fast. So it's just a technical thing, but it's something that's very, very important for us. And it basically allowed us to do great object-oriented principles. So for the first time in PHP, you didn't have to write crap code. You could write good code in PHP, perfect code in PHP. It was the perfect tool to build perfect code. The problem was that it wasn't the perfect tool to write code quickly. And those are 2 separate things, right? We all know that if you want to write something very quickly, maybe use WordPress. But it is not good code. So don't look at the code underneath. It is not good code, but you can do things quickly. So in Symfony 2, everything was explicit. You needed to write code and configure everything. You wrote many lines of code, and it was very predictable, but it was just a lot of work to get things done. And over the past 5 years, it's gotten better like this. Better and better and better and better and better. So we wanted to take it to the next level. So the question is, can we start with a rock-solid foundation, the foundation of Symfony 2, where everything is done correctly, and object-oriented principles are king? And can we do that and have a fantastic developer experience, where we love to code and can code quickly and get things done? So one of the first questions is, should we build a monolithic, a giant application, or should we use a micro framework and build a very small application? How many people have used a micro framework, like Silex or Slim? Yeah, a few people. I'll show one in a second. So if you use Symfony before today, you use the Symfony Standard Edition. So we gave you a project. We said, here is a Symfony project. And it looked like this. This is what you started with. And it was probably, I think, 35 files or so. So not huge, but not small. And it gave you, for example, many tools if you wanted to use an ORM, but not all of them. It gave you some tools if you had a traditional HTML application. And if you're building an API, it gave you almost no tools. I think the Locastic people can agree with that. It was basically built for an old school non-API application. So it was kind of big, and it didn't work for anybody. Everyone had to customize this because it was not a great solution for anyone. Okay, so let's look at something different. How many people have used Laravel? A few more. So Laravel is even bigger than Symfony Standard Edition, but at least it gives you most of what you need. They give you even more, which is good in some ways because now I don't have to install things. I have everything I need for an ORM, everything I need if I'm using HTML templating, and everything I need kind of for an API. So this is another approach. And then the third approach is the micro framework approach. This is a micro framework. Every micro framework looks like this. It's a single file, and here is your page. Awesome. It's completely understandable, but you get nothing. There's no database, no templating engine, no security, nothing. Everything has to be added manually, and that means a lot of configuration. But it's beautiful because it's so small and understandable. So we have these pros and these cons of the micro and the macro way of doing things. So in Symfony Flex, we were thinking about this. We wanted both of them. We wanted to use all of the tools of the Symfony full stack framework, but not have this giant thing if we didn't need this giant thing. So this is where Symfony Flex comes in. It's a very simple idea. So it's, what if we could start a project from nothing? Normally we think if you're using a framework or you're using WordPress or you're using Drupal, then you download the big directory structure for whatever you're using. So we said, no, what if we started with nothing? And then all you did was use Composer to require the packages you needed. And then as you did that, those packages actually built your application, added directories, added configuration files automatically. It scaffolded and built your project bigger and bigger. So this is what the Symfony, a new Symfony project looks like today. And actually not today. If you go download Symfony today, we still use the old way. This is all available today, but it won't become the official way until Symfony Core in November. So this is all available, but it's not the official way until November. So in November, this is what your Symfony project will look like. It's one file, composer.json. It has only 3 dependencies in it, because PHP doesn't count. 3 dependencies, and the last one will probably go away. So probably just 2 dependencies. This thing called Flex, and the framework bundle, which is the core and heart of Symfony. So you start with just this one file, okay? And then we run Composer install. And we know what happens. It downloads the libraries that we need. Now, as it's doing it, you're going to see that sometimes when it installs a library, it has some extra text. It says, detecting auto-configuration settings for Symfony Flex. This is like further down on the next screen. What happens here is, in addition to downloading things into your render directory, which is what Composer normally does, Symfony Flex is a Composer plugin, and it looks to see if each library that it's installing has a recipe. And so as it's downloading, for example, Symfony/Flex, that library has a recipe. And that recipe might make several changes to my application. It might create some directories. It might create some configuration files. So in this case, a second ago, we only had composer.json. And of course, composer.lock after we ran composer install. Every other one of these files came from 2 different recipes that were just installed. I'll show them to you. Oh, by the way, the recipes, where are these recipes? The recipes are actually stored in a special repository on GitHub, github.com/symfony/recipes, and you can just see all the different libraries inside of there that have recipes. And I'm going to show you what those look like. So I mentioned that there's only 2 recipes that were installed. There were only 2 recipes that just did something. The first one is Symfony/Flex. So when we installed Symfony/Flex, it looked in this recipe repository, and it found this, and basically all that repository did, was add a .env.dist file, which is a little environmental configuration file. So that's all that recipe did. Yes. The other recipe was Framework Bundle, because that's the other library we installed. When it installed Framework Bundle, it found this recipe. In this case, it copied a few more files: config directory, public directory, src directory, and then a make file. And then you see this manifest.json? That's not actually copied into your project. That contains instructions. So this is basically the most complex recipe that exists inside of the Flex world. It's fairly simple. It lists a number of directories that should be copied from the recipe into your project. It has the ability to add some configuration, environment variable configurations. It can add things to your .getignore file, which is awesome. So as you install libraries, if that library has a standard file that should be ignored, then it automatically gets added to your .getignore file. And see the bundles thing on top? If you're a Symfony user, you know that whenever you install a bundle, you go into your app kernel and you paste a new bundles line to enable that bundle. When you use Flex, that automatically happens for you. So whenever you install a bundle, it automatically enables itself. So it's a very simple idea. When I install a library, the library just activates itself and copies whatever configuration it needs into my project. So I just install something and it just works. And all the configuration to make it work is in my project. I can see it and I can change it if I want to. All right, so let's install a few other things. Because remember, before, with the standard edition, we started with about 9 bundles. The standard edition is the framework bundle and about 9 other bundles. Now we have just the framework bundle. So we get to choose what we actually want. So we're going to install the Symfony web server bundle. It's a tiny development server, PHP development server that helps with development. It's nothing too important. But we're going to install the web server bundle. So we're going to say composer require web server. Now notice I said we're going to install Symfony/web-server-bundle. That's the name of the library in packages in the composer world. But to install it, we're able to say composer require web server. And that's because another thing that Flex gives us is aliases. It's basically the ability to give libraries shorter names. And the reason that we've done that in Flex is we want it to be easy for users to know if they need a tool, what is the recommended tool that we have for that. So you can just say composer require web server. And it's like whatever that is, whatever we recommend as the web server, the development web server, you get. And you can look these up by going to a website called symfony.sh. It's not very pretty because this is all alpha software, but you can see a big list of all of the recipes and all of the aliases that you can use for them. So most of the time when you see me install things, it'll be the short name. Later, we'll want a logger. We'll just say composer require logger. And that will go and get the monolog bundle and install it into Symfony. So in this case, when we require web server, it of course downloads that bundle into our project and it auto-registers it in a bundles.php file. So not a lot, but we basically didn't need to do anything to get that working. Also, when we, let's see if we can see it, yep. When we install the web server bundle, one of its dependencies is Symfony/console, the console component. And actually the console component, as you can see, has a recipe. So in this case, we really wanted to install the web server bundle, but we also got the console, and its recipe was also red. And because we installed the console, that created the bin/console file for us. So again, in old Symfony, you started with a project that had this bin/console file. In new Symfony, you start with nothing. But as soon as you actually want the console and install the console, it's going to be created for you. So that was always the problem with micro frameworks. We give you nothing, and when you install something, you have to configure it yourself. So it's like, no. With Flex, we're just going to do that for you. And of course, you can change this file if you want to, but we're going to give you the one to start with. All right, and then once we have that installed, we can run bin console server :start, and that starts the built-in PHP web server. And we have a fancy site, localhost 20,000, which is just an error. But we actually have Symfony running. So at this point, our project is very, very small. we have a container, a service container. We have a routing system. That's it. And if you are curious about the services part of things, we only have about 50 services. There are only about 50 objects that exist in our system right now to make it work. And they're all related to basically the routing and container system, the smallest part of Symfony. If you installed a Symfony Standard Edition today, it starts with about 230 services. So this is about 1/5 of the size. By the way, fun fact, eventually people are going to benchmark Symfony Flex, and it's going to crush everything. It's going to be way faster than every other framework. It's not really fair though, because Symfony Flex is the first time that you're able to create a framework that has nothing. So you always see those hello world benchmarks, and whoever wins is basically the framework that has the most things removed from it to make the hello world benchmark the fastest. Symfony Flex is nothing, so when you actually see this benchmark, it's going to be super, super fast. So I say that's kind of cheating in a sense, but this is the point of Symfony Flex. You only install what you need. So you're not going to have something extra. If you don't need it, don't install it, and you don't have extra things slowing your application down or confusing developers or just being in the way. So our project is small. On the downside, it means we don't have a templating engine, we don't have a database, we don't have a logger, we don't have any extra crap, which is good, but we don't have any tools either. All right, so let's install a few other things. This is actually a big one. So I'm going to install an admin generator. So eventually we're thinking we need some admin section so we can do things. So in this case, we can just say composer require admin. It's an alias again. This is going to install several things because we don't have even a database installed yet. So this is going to install Twig, templating engine. It's going to install the form components because the admin generator requires the form components. And it's also going to install Doctrine. So it's going to install our ORM. And all of those have recipes associated with them. So let's follow them. So when we installed the Twig package just now, which I love this, it auto-configured itself. It means it added itself to the bundles.php file, so we didn't need to. It auto-configured itself by adding a configuration file. And in the configuration file, it said, our templates are going to live in /templates. And then it also created that directory for us. So if we had just installed Twig, composer required Twig, or composer required templating, we would have gotten this. So if you need a templating engine, you run one command, you have the configuration file, you have the directory, you just start using templates. That's it. Also, if you install Twig, and then 5 minutes later you decide you don't want it, and you say composer remove Twig, all of this goes backwards. It removes the configuration file, it removes the templates directory, it uninstalls itself from your system, which is pretty cool. Doctrine. The Doctrine/Doctrine bundle recipe. Again, it auto-registered itself in the bundles, it auto-configured itself in doctrine.yaml. What I love about this is everything is explicit. There's no longer a question of, like, why do templates live in this directory? Where's the magic code that says templates live in templates? It's right in your project. You can see the configuration file that says templates live here, or the configuration file that says that your entities live in app/entity. If you want to put them in a different directory, then you change the namespace here. All the configuration is inside of your code, so you can just open it up and look at it instead of it hiding somewhere deep in a core file. Another thing, I'm not going to talk much about the .env file. It's a new way of doing configuration in Symfony 4. If you're used to the parameters.yml file in Symfony 3, it's kind of similar to that, but it makes it easier to use environment variables. But the really cool thing is when you install Doctrine bundle, it actually adds the configuration you need to your .env file. So this would be equivalent to it actually adding something to parameters.yml when you installed it. So all I need to do is go into my .env file and update my database URL. And the code is already, as you can see in the previous slide, it's already set up to use that database URL in my configuration. And then it also, Doctrine bundle, when it installed, it added a production-specific configuration file. Okay, so what about the admin bundle? We said composer require admin. This is actually the package it installed, this Javier Aguiles/easy admin bundle. It auto-registered itself as a bundle. It added a configuration file for itself, and it even imported its own routes. Because the easy admin bundle has some routing. Symfony users know whenever you bring in a bundle that has routes, you need to go to your app config routing.yml file and paste a few lines there to import routes. That happens automatically now. So one of the things that's really fun with Flex is if you have everything committed to Git before you install something, then when you install something, you can very easily see what changes it made. You can see it created this directory, created that file. Very, very explicit. All right, so at this point, if we actually went to so we installed an admin generator. So if we get localhost colon 8000/admin, we get this error here, which is basically the admin bundle saying you don't have any backend configured yet. Right, we've installed an admin generator, but we don't even have a database table yet. Okay, so let's create an entity, doctrine entity. We already have doctrine installed. If we didn't, it would be composer required ORM, and then it would install itself. But we already have it installed. So we'll create a new entity. We'll call it tasty recipe. And right now, this is something that you do by hand. You create this. I would like, before Symfony 4 comes out, I would like to basically recreate the generator. This is something that I'm hoping I can do so that we have really, really good generation commands. But right now, this is a file that you create by hand, which is not that big of a deal. But so far, we haven't actually had to code anything. So this is the first time I'm saying we had to actually create this file. So we had to create this file. And then to create the database, doctrine colon database colon create. We're just running a bin console command. That's the same as in Symfony 3. To create the database schema, doctrine colon schema colon update. Also the same as Symfony 3. And then we can use the admin. How do we use the admin? We just go, this is specific to the admin generator. We just go into the admin generator's configuration file and we add some configuration. So the difference in Symfony 3 is that we had app config, config.yml, which had all of the configuration for our application. Now each package has its own configuration. And when you install that package, it creates that file for you and creates any default configuration you need. In this case, when we installed the easy admin bundle, it created this file for us. And this is actually the default configuration it gave us. Nothing, except documentation. And I think that's going to be one of the huge things with Symfony 4. The fact that when you install a package, it will give you a little bit of default configuration. But then if the recipe is written well, it might also give you 40 lines of commented out configuration with comments above it. So that if you need to configure something in a bundle, you can just go into that file and you might actually see what you need already commented out with documentation above it. So you can just uncomment that, change the value, and you're ready to go. All right. Now, if we go to localhost colon 8000/admin, we get our full admin generator, which I won't show you because that actually already exists today. That's just a bundle we installed that works in Symfony 3. So let's do some real work. Let's actually create a page. So we're going to create recipe controller, extends controller. One thing to notice for Symfony users is app bundle is gone. In fact, there's not even an app directory. You just put all of your code directly in src. And actually, there's really no change with this. If you're using Symfony 3 today and you're using the app bundle, you're probably not actually using any of the features of a bundle. We kept the bundle in Symfony 3 mostly because people were used to it. But we always had the plan to eventually remove a bundle. Because really, we don't need bundles. We just need to write PHP code. So if you want a controller, you go into src/controller and you make a controller class. There's no need for this bundle thing. You will still use third-party bundles, but your code will not have bundles anymore. It's just not necessary. It doesn't give you anything extra. So I'm going to use annotation routing here. You can also use YAML, of course. And what I really want to show you, because this is mostly like it is already today, other than the directory is different, what I really want to show you is that if you need services, you just ask for them by type hinting. And this is actually something that's not new in Symfony Flex. This is actually a feature that is new in Symfony 3.3, which is already released today. Some of you guys already know about this. If you're in a controller, you can just type hint what service you need, and it's automatically passed to you. Yep?
Do I need to extend controller or implement some interfaces for this without the wiring?
Good question. Do I need to extend controller or implement some interface in order for this auto wiring to work? And the answer is no. So I extend controller here because I have shortcuts. The way this actually works for people that are interested, the way you actually activate this magic functionality inside of your controllers is your controllers need to be mapped as services and they need to have a special tag. But for people, this is something that you have automatically when you start the project. So you don't ever need to worry about it yourself. That's actually how it's activated.
I have a question too.
Yep.
1 or 2 slides before you talked about the recipes, and when the recipe is well written, that you'll get some kind of default configuration and maybe even the documentation about it. But what about if the recipe isn't well written?
So the question is, if the recipe is well written, ideally we get a great configuration file with even more documentation below it. But what happens if the recipe is not well written? Really good question. The Symfony recipes repository is guarded. You don't get your bundle in there unless you pass a whole bunch of strict requirements. So the only thing that get into the recipes repository are high quality. There's actually an automated bot. When you submit a pull request to it, it says, nope, you're missing this, nope, you're missing this, nope, you're missing this, nope, you're missing this. In addition to, you need to be approved by 2 Symfony Core members. Your pull request needs to. So nothing gets into the recipes repository unless it's already high quality. Yep.
So can we install something that doesn't support Flex?
Great question. Can we install something that doesn't support Flex? 2 answers to that. One is, of course, because you are always just requiring a bundle. So if I have a bundle and it doesn't have a Flex recipe because the Symfony guys are being really annoying and not letting my recipe into the repository, then it just means that you're installing it the old way, which means that my README would say, you need to run this command, you then need to go to this file to enable the bundle, you then need to create this configuration file. The second answer is that there is another repository called, instead of Symfony/recipes, it's Symfony/recipes-contrib. And this is a repository that is also a recipes repository, but it's much less guarded. You just need to pass a few basic requirements and get a few people from the community to say thumbs up, and it's automatically merged in. So it's much less guarded. However, in order to install something from the contrib repository and get its recipe, you need to opt into it. There's a small flag in your composer.json file when you start a Flex project that says whether or not you want to install things from the contrib repository or not. So we'll see if that changes. The problem with that is I can see some confusion. If I have a bundle that is in the contrib repository and you install it and you have that flag to on, you get my recipe. But if you forgot to set that flag or you don't know about it, then you don't get my recipe, and then my bundle doesn't work for you unless you do other things. So I can see some usability problems with that. But we're trying to balance anyone adding a recipe and it being crap or doing weird things. So we'll find out how that works. But definitely the one repository, the main repository, is heavily guarded.
What is the feedback on maintaining 2 repositories, one for the SIPs, one for our bundles?
Good. What is the feedback on maintaining 2 repositories, one for the bundle and one for the recipe? Because notice they're in separate places. And this is one of the biggest complaints so far when Flex came out, is like, wait, why don't we have the recipes inside of the bundle, right? There's 2 reasons for that. One is a reason that you won't like very much, but the other one is a good reason. One reason is just for simplicity. The Flex server, because there actually is a Flex server that the Flex plugin makes API calls to, the Flex server needs to know all of the recipes available. So the easiest way to accomplish that is to have a central repository instead of scanning repositories for those. It also allows us to do that guarded thing where we only let recipes in so that people can't just make their own recipes in their own bundles and then have them installed. The second reason, there'll be a recipe for that. There'll be a recipe so that when I install It'll be a little different, but basically I'll be able to install Webpack Encore, and it will activate a recipe. So yeah, good questions. So back to this about the services. So if you want a service, you just add a type hint for it. Instead of saying this arrow get or this arrow container arrow get. You can still do that for most services, but this is the new official way. Which is nice because it's proper dependency injection. That's the idea. And we want to make it very user-friendly. Now, how do I know what to put there, though? How did I magically know that Entity Manager Interface was the type hint I should use to get the Entity Manager? And the answer is, with a bin console command, of course you can also read the documentation, but there's a bin console command. How many people have used the debug:container command in the past? Okay, several people. More of you should use it. Debug:container lists all of the services in your entire application. And services are tools. So these are your tools in your application. If you pass a -- types flag, it's going to give you a list of all of the type hints that you can use all over your application for auto wiring. So this is obviously only a very, very short version of the list. There are many, many more. I can type in any of these arguments to my controller, and it's going to pass me that object. So you'll see that in the Symfony documentation all over the place. When you read about logging, for example, all of a sudden you'll just see a controller example with a logger interface argument. You won't see this arrow get logger anymore. You'll see it be a dependency injection. All right, so inside of here, we got the entity manager. We made a query. We rendered a template. Here's the template. Nothing important about it at all. It's in the templates directory that was created. This is not interesting. I just want to show you everything. And now, finally, we have our /recipes URL, which is returning the one recipe in the database. All right, so our recipes deserve an API. So we're going to say composer require API. And that's actually going to install API Platform, which is an independent library bundle. It's kind of both. In the Symfony world, the Locastic guys use it all the time. It's amazing. Very, very powerful API tools. You can use it today, of course. With Flex, it just auto-installs it. So it takes care of adding some configuration files for you so that you don't have to. Flex is not like the craziest thing ever. It just makes the workflow really nice. It just takes care of it automates the work that should be automated. Adding configuration files, creating directories, those things. So you can see here it installs several things, and down here there is a recipe for the API platform. And then to activate it, all we need to do is just add an annotation on our entity class at API resource. And again, this is not specific to Flex, this is just API platform, and we already have a functional API. So this is a small advertisement for API platform for those of you that have not used it before. So we have a JSON endpoint, we also have a JSON LD, a Hydra JSON LD endpoint for everything. It comes with documentation. You can play with the documentation. You can send test post requests to the documentation and see what you get back. So it's really, really cool. All right, what else? So let's say, going back to, remember, our application is still fairly small. We've only installed what we need to. So do we have a logger yet? I don't know, maybe. Maybe we have a logger. Maybe it was installed already. If we weren't sure, we could install it. But let's just start using the logger. Again, I'm going to say logger interface. I'm going to use auto wiring to tell Symfony to pass that to me, and then I'm going to log something. And oh, we don't have a logger yet. So we see the error. Controller recipes action requires that you provide a value for the logger argument. Blah 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 blah. It's basically saying I couldn't find anything to pass to you. There is no logger yet. No problem. Step 1. Composer require logger. It installs it, it auto registers the bundle. It actually creates several configuration files for us, a development configuration file and a production configuration file. And step 2 is nothing. It just works. There's our log file right there. This is actually the Flex experience. I have been installing some larger libraries. This is the idea. You install it, and then that's it. You just start using it. What about butter debugging? We were trying for recipe fonts, butter debugging. I don't know if it works. Composer required profiler. Symfony users are familiar with the web debug toolbar on the bottom. We don't have that right now. So we say composer require profiler. It auto-registers bundle. It adds a configuration file. It auto-imports the routing that's needed for the profiler. So like last time, step 2 is nothing. It just works. So that's actually a really cool one. You refresh this page, and you have no web debug toolbar. You run composer require profiler. You go back and refresh, and you do have a profiler. Everything is automatically added for you. And of course, you can remove it and undo everything also. I showed this because sometimes people aren't that familiar with the profiler. It's awesome. Lots of things on it. All right, so let's keep going. Caching. Well, okay, so now I'm just thinking, I keep building my application, and I keep needing more things. Do I have caching yet? Well, caching is actually standard in Symfony. This is one of those you don't need to install. And by the way, how would you know that? There's 2 ways. One, when you read about caching in the future, it's going to say at the very top, you need to run composer require caching, if you need to. In this case, caching actually comes with the framework bundle, so it's something that was automatically available. The second way is you can run debug container -- types. So if I run this command in this case, I already have at the beginning of my project something called a cache item pool interface. That's actually my caching object. I know, it has an ugly name, cache item pool interface. So if I need this inside of my controller, I do the same thing. I type in cache item pool interface, it's passed to me, and then I just start using it. I'm not touching any configuration files. In fact, I have almost not touched any configuration files at all. We've just been coding inside of PHP the entire time. And then fun fact, this is relatively new to Symfony, Symfony 3.3 I think, or 3.2. If you use Symfony's cache components, then all of your cache details show up in the profiler. So it's one of the tabs in the profiler. We'll show you everything that's being cached inside there. All right, so what about code organization? So right now we have something that looks like this. This is our controller. It has several arguments. We're using the cache, we're querying the database, we're rendering a template. So let's say that we want to organize this code into somewhere else. So we're going to use the standard way of doing this inside of Symfony, which is we're going to organize into a service class, right? So we create a separate service class called the recipe loader, and we move all of our code into some method called find all recipes. And notice I have a ... The rest of the code is in between. But of course, my code needs those 3 things. It needs the entity manager, it needs the logger, and it needs the cache object. So just like always, no different, we use dependency injection. We create a construct function. We add 3 arguments. Because we are good developers, we type hint those 3 arguments. And then we set them as properties, and we use them below. So this is standard good practices in Symfony 2 and Symfony 3. It's all the same. The difference is, you would normally now go to a configuration file and configure all of this. To say that I have this service and its first constructor argument is this, its second constructor argument is that. You won't do that anymore. You don't have to do that anymore. I'm simply going to go back to my controller and type in recipe loader and use it. So there's no configuration file touched at all. We touched our controller PHP file and we touched our service PHP file, and that's it. That's because auto wiring is turned on everywhere. So Symfony is reading our type hints to know what classes we need. So we type hint recipe loader here. It says, okay, I'll go look at the recipe loader. I'll look at its 3 arguments. I'll pass the values for those, and everything gets wired without you touching anything. Until it doesn't work, right? Because this all looks great, right? And I walk out, and everyone's thinking, yeah, but what happens when it all goes to the shitter? It doesn't work. Like edge cases. So here's an example of when it won't work. I have a construct function. The logger is good, right? Logger interface, but is debug? What is Symfony going to pass to that? It doesn't even have a type hint. The question is nothing. So when we added auto wiring to Symfony, and by the way, auto wiring is in Symfony 3.3. That was released 3 months ago. So all of this stuff is already in normal, standard Symfony. When we built auto wiring, which is magic, auto wiring is magic, things happen automatically. We wanted to do it in a way where you would never have a moment of what the hell just happened, of surprises. So if there's ever any question at all about what argument should be passed somewhere, instead of Symfony guessing, it throws an exception. And the nice thing is, because Symfony has a compiled container, and it doesn't matter if you understand what that means or not, it's not important at all. Basically, on page load in the development environment, Symfony validates every single service in your container. So if you make a mistake, or if Symfony can't wire an argument to some service, and you're not even using that service on this page, it doesn't matter. You'll get an exception. You can't use any page, or even use bin console, without seeing a big, giant, clear error. Nothing works at all until you fix this. So there's no way you can go to production with a surprise. We will tell you, you have to fix this. So in this case, it tells you cannot auto-wire service, recipe loader, argument is debug, must have a type hint, or be given a value explicitly. Because auto-wiring works with type hints. If there's no type hint, then we can't help you. So how do we fix that? Finally, we go to the configuration file. So you only go to the configuration file once Symfony says, I need help. So we can go to the configuration file here. We can give it the name of our class. Also, new thing in Symfony 3.3, we started recommending that your service IDs are actually your class names. So you can see that's your ID and that's your class name. So you mention the ID of your service, you say arguments, but you don't need to pass it all 4 arguments. You just need to pass it the 1 argument you need to wire. And the way you do that is by saying the name of the argument. We purposely put the $sign in there. It looks a little funny. We wanted to put the $sign in there so that it's very clear what this is. This is the name of the argument inside of your function. And just like I mentioned a second ago, if something goes wrong, like you rename that argument in your class to debug instead of is debug, nothing works. Everything explodes with a very clear error that says, you wired is debug. There is no is debug argument, so it's not going to let you continue until you fix the problem. Or, sneak peek, this is not even merged yet. This is probably what it will look like in Symfony 4. We will probably not have you have YAML configuration file standard anymore. We will probably have everything done in PHP. And the interface for doing it will probably look like this. So this is just a fun thing. You'll probably actually have a services.php file, and it will look like this. So S arrow, I'm missing a line here, but S is basically services. Services arrow get, give me my service, and then you call an argument function to specify that argument. So there's a bunch of code that you have up here, but that's the idea. So that's just something that is hopefully going to be merged in the next couple of days. YAML is great, but especially now that our service IDs are class names, PHP configuration is even better because of the class syntax. It's really annoying in YAML to have to keep saying app/service/something when there's already a standard way in PHP to do that, and it auto-completes in your editor. So we're trying to make things easier, more auto-completion, better errors. That's another thing. If you make a mistake here, you'll actually say your mistake was on line 5, where in YAML it would load the entire YAML file and then figure out that there's an error. It can't really tell you exactly what line it's on unless it's a syntax error. So, so this is something we're trying, and we're trying to make it just as beautiful as YAML, but better experience.
Question.
Yep.
Sometimes you are checking the type hint in the interface, sometimes you are type hint in the class.
Good. Sometimes we're type hinting an interface, sometimes a class name. This is not a good example, but this is a good example. So the ultimate question of like what my type hint should be goes back to that bin console debug :container -- types. That gives you the list of the valid type hints that you can use. Why is it an interface sometimes, and why is it a class name sometimes? It depends on the bundle. So for example, monologue bundle is what gives us the logger object. The monologue bundle decided when it was set up for auto wiring, it decided to make its auto wireable thing the interface. And it did that because typing interfaces is a better practice. Now the way auto wiring works, without getting into a lot of boring detail, is actually when you type in something like logger interface, it looks in the container for a service whose ID is PSR/log/logger interface. It actually looks for an ID in the container that exactly matches the type hint. So when you run debug :container -- types, it's actually printing out all of these services in the container whose ID is an interface or a class. So the way that Monolog Bundle does that is Symfony users know that Monolog Bundle normally gives you a service called logger. All lowercase, Logger, logger. That still exists, but Monolog Bundle also set up a service alias, which is not a feature many Symfony developers worry about. A service alias is like a symbolic link, and it basically says I can set up a service called foo, and it's a symbolic link to bar. So if somebody asks for foo, give them bar. So the Monolog Bundle set up an alias for PSR/log/logger interface, and they have that alias to logger. So it means if someone asks for the logger interface service, it actually gives them the logger service. But for auto wiring, this is important because of our type hint here, auto wiring looks for an ID in the container called PSR/log/logger interface. It finds one and it resolves it. So most of the time you're going to see interfaces used because third-party bundles are going to add aliases for their interfaces so that we can use auto wiring and type hint the interface because type hinting the interface is better, right? But in our code, with our recipe loader, most of the time we won't create an interface. Most of the time we'll just create a class called recipe loader. And so then we will just put the recipe loader class and it will pass us that object. If we did create an interface, if we had recipe loader interface, recipe loader implements recipe loader interface, then we could type in the recipe loader interface. But only if we created an alias from recipe loader interface to recipe loader. If that didn't make sense, don't worry about it, but that's the reason. So, in my opinion, the one downside of all of this interface stuff, it's great that you can type into interfaces everywhere, because that's the best practice. Some of the names of the interfaces are really ugly. Like we saw cache item pool interface. Whoa, okay. I was looking for the cache object. Maybe this is it? I'm not sure. There's a few in the security component too, like token storage interface. Ah, that's my least favorite. Token storage interface, which is clearly how you get the user object that's logged in, right? Makes sense? To make matters worse, there are 2 token storage interfaces, so good luck with your use statements. That will hopefully be something where we'll create a new class that will have a shorter name. That's my hope. And maybe we'll create something called the security util class. And so you can type in the long interface if you want, or we'll give you a simpler short thing called security utils. And it will have a method on it like get user.
Wasn't security context before?
Yes, it was. Yeah, we used to have a class called security context, which had everything all in one, and we removed it. And there are some technical reasons why we did that. It caused some circular references because it caused too many things to be instantiated. If you've used Symfony for a long time, this sort of makes sense. All of those are gone. There have been optimizations made to the container, which are incredible, which basically make that not a problem anymore. In Symfony 3.3, you can create a service locator where you have one object with 10 objects in it, but all those 10 objects are loaded lazily. Again, if this makes no sense, it's cool. There are much smarter people than me who are doing incredible things in the very low-level core of Symfony to make things work better and make things work faster. All right, good. It's featured out. Okay. And then the last thing I'll show you guys is, okay, let's just see an example of hooking into Symfony. So what if I want to create a twig extension? This is a relatively easy thing to do. What I'm talking about is in my twig template, I want to add a new filter called ago, which would say something like 5 minutes ago, 2 days ago, that idea. It doesn't exist right now. So if you try this, you get a big error that says there's no filter called ago. Okay. And by the way, there is a bundle that gives you this already, so you should actually use that bundle. But let's pretend there isn't one. So step 1 is we're going to create a twig extension class. We're hooking into twig. So I have a class called app extension, extends twig extension. You just read the documentation. This is how you create a filter. Cool? And then step 2, there's no step 2. That's it. Again, the whole point is to get us out of configuration files. We create the class and it just works. In Symfony 3, you would need to go to a configuration file and register this class as a service and give it a tag, basically a little flag that said, I am a Twig extension. We got rid of that. By the way, all the old way of doing things still exists, and actually you need to opt into the new way. All this auto wiring stuff, all this magic is something you need to opt into. Now when you start a new project, we give you the configuration that gives that to you. But if you don't want this or something, you can always remove that configuration and you have classic explicit Symfony. So we sell the explicit standard base, and then we built an optional tool on top of that to make developers' lives better. But if you don't like it, because some people won't, awesome. That's the beauty of Symfony. We're not trying to solve everyone's problems. You can do whatever you like personally. So in this case, there's a feature called auto configuration. There's auto wiring and auto configuration. And it's very simple. Basically, when we auto tag services for you when we can. So the idea is that in this case, you already created a class that extends Twig extension. It's in your code. When would you ever not want this to be a Twig extension? Like, why would I need to go to a configuration file and say, this is a Twig extension? I know it's a Twig extension. It extends the Twig extension class. So there's several times in the code where this is going to happen. Another one is a Symfony event subscriber. That's where you create a class and it needs to implement event subscriber interface. As soon as you create a class that implements event subscriber interface, it works. You don't have to do anything else. Security voters, another one. You have to extend some voter class. As soon as you do that, it just works. Okay? And so what this means is basically as you're reading the Symfony's docs, there used to be step 1 and step 2. Step 2 is gone. So it's nothing you need to worry about. It's just all of a sudden you have less stuff to do because it's being done for you. Again, it's all about automation of things. And then this is just a little bonus security. Because security is important, even though we all like to not worry about it and have it done for us. You can install something called the security-checker. Composer requires security-checker. When you do that, it automatically configures itself, and you have a bin console security :check. And it's looking to see if any of your packages in composer.json have known security vulnerabilities so that you can upgrade. Flex will also, as you see, give you a warning if you try to install a package with a known security vulnerability. So, it's one of those things where Flex is trying to make it obvious, right? Because I don't know if last night a vulnerability was found in a library I use. I'm not checking every day to see if there's a new version of something, so we'll try to make it obvious. So I've mentioned several times Symfony 3.3 and Flex, and this is really a presentation that's a mixture of the two. So Flex is, what is Flex? I only said it once. It's a composer plugin. You can see it on Symfony's repository. It's not even that big. It's just a composer plugin. It reads recipes, and it automates the configuration of things, which that small thing ends up changing everything, allowing us to have a micro framework that gets bigger only as we install things. It's a super trendy name we came up with. There was an email that went around, and we were all thinking of trendy names, and Flex sounded good, right? It's also very trendy to have an X right now in your name, right? Like a Redux and things like that. So we didn't want to be left out. Flex is alpha, so things are going to change, but you're installing stable packages. So it's kind of confusing. Like the way that the recipes are read might change, but ultimately when I say composer require Twig, I'm installing the stable version of Twig. So it's alpha, but not alpha. It's not like it's going to break your application. It's just the way that things are installed are going to change. But of course, you're going to need to, invent your own documentation sometimes because things aren't documented well or aren't documented at all yet. And everything else is already there. Easy admin bundle, API platform, those libraries are already there. Monologue, Symfony Cache, web server bundle, those are already included in the Symfony Standard Edition. And most importantly, the biggest thing was auto wiring. That is something that's standard in Symfony 3.3. And if you have a project that you created before Symfony 3.3, we have a really clear upgrade document on how to opt into these features. It's pretty easy. It's mostly just copy 20 lines of code into a configuration file, and then all of your you opt into all of these features. So if you have an older project and you're interested, then check out our documentation on that. So cool things are already there, but they'll be cooler in November, which is really close. Bad news, it's September, so winter is basically here. Yeah, winter's coming. I wasn't going to say winter's coming. I'm glad somebody else did. I wasn't going to go there. I live in a colder climate than you guys, so winter is actually here for me. This is the last summer thing that we're doing, and then we'll go home and it will be cold and depressing. So, all right, on that note, thank you. Now, there were some questions while we did it, which is great. Any other questions?
I have two questions.
Yes, good.
One is regarding the Flex, maybe it's a stupid question, but is it possible to maybe in future use Flex in some other projects, like you mentioned, not maybe for example, WordPress, but maybe in Drupal or something?
Is it possible to use Flex in other projects in the
Other
future?
PHP projects are started using Composer or already using, so is it possible to do something with Flex?
Yeah, so could I use Flex in the future for Drupal?
Yeah.
Or actually in the workshop, somebody asked for Laravel.
Yeah.
And the question is maybe, and the answer is maybe. Right now, like yes and no. So really, the only thing you need to use Flex is the package called Symfony/Flex. There's nothing Symfony framework about that. Yes, it has Symfony in the name, but it's just a Composer plugin. But everything, all the recipes are aimed at Symfony framework. So if you could actually take a Drupal project or a Laravel project and install Symfony Flex, but then most of the things that you would install, most of the recipes are bundles, which are incompatible with Drupal and incompatible with Laravel. Even things that are libraries like Twig or PHP units, they're assuming that you're in the Flex directory structure. So it might create a few configuration files or some directories that's what the directories are called in Symfony, but they're not what the directories are called in Laravel or what the directories are called in Drupal. So yes, so what we'd need is probably eventually probably a separate recipes repository. Because that's all it is. You would need, I'm using Laravel or I'm using Drupal with Flex. So it's using the Drupal recipes repository, which might have some duplication. There might be PHP unit for Symfony and PHP unit for Drupal, but PHP unit for Drupal has different recipe because it has to install things in different locations. So in theory, yes. Is there a lot of incentive to do that? No, because we want everyone to use Symfony, right? So, maybe, we'll see. But yeah, there's nothing Symfony specific.
And the second question is what's related to the Flex, but the security component. I think like documentation of security component is not quite good as other parts. Like if you ask a lot of Symfony developers, they're probably most familiar with how security component works under the hood. Like we all know to implement the user for login for this registration, not with the FOSS user, but even the custom, like user provider. But I don't think even here there is like one people, and maybe you, who can explain how really security component works under the hood.
Yeah,
That's like a huge problem.
Yeah, it is. So that's the thing. That's a really good question. So basically the question is the security component is not documented as well as other things, and it's way harder. So the security component in Symfony is the most complex component in Symfony. If you use the form components, they're similar. Yeah. They're both very difficult. Here's what happened with the Symfony security component. Here's a historical story behind this. A lot of Symfony is ported from Java Spring or inspired by Java Spring. You see that with the dependency injection container. When Symfony 2 was nearing completion, one of the components it did not have at all was a security component. And Fabian, the lead developer of Symfony, said, we'll just release without it. And we can add it later. People can use different things if they want to. But obviously, this would be a big missing piece. So one community member, his name is Johannes Schmidt. You might recognize him from JMS bundles. he went to Spring, Java Spring's security component, and ported it almost exactly. So most of the complexity you see in Symfony's security component is actually because it was ported from Java, and the complexity of this big, giant Java Spring thing. The other problem was it was done late in Symfony, it was rushed, and then about 6 months, year and a half, some short amount of time in the length of Symfony, after Symfony 2 was released, Johannes disappeared. He's not like dead. He's still there. He's fine. He's okay. But he stopped contributing entirely. And so there was the most complex component in Symfony, lost its lead developer, and basically no one knew how it worked. And we spent years having new people adopted. I'm one of the people that works on the security component now, and slowly fixing it and making it simpler. One of the biggest things that's causing problems now with the security components is doing things that don't break backwards compatibility. There are several bugs that are very easy to fix, but very difficult to fix without breaking backwards compatibility. And there finally is good momentum on fixing those things and making them simpler. Another example is for Symfony users, the user interface. So if you want to create a user in Symfony, you have a class called user, and you implement this user interface. The user interface has 5 methods on it, and if you were implementing an API, like maybe you have like an API token or OAuth, 3 of those methods don't make any sense. They're called get password, get salt, and there's another one called erase credentials, but get password and get salt. So hold on, I'm creating an API. There's no password for my users. So why do I have to have a password? Well, it turns out that you can leave those methods blank. You can leave get password, get salt, and erase credentials entirely blank. They're only used if you use Symfony's password encoding functionality. So unless you actually go and get the security password encoding service and say encode this user's plain password, those methods are never called. But this is very confusing when you start using Symfony, right? You're like, what is going on here? So that's another case where in a perfect world, that interface would be split. There would be a user interface, which would basically just have get UUID on it, just some identifier, and nothing else. And then there'd be a separate interface, which would be something like the password encodable user. And if you had a password, then you would implement that. So there's all kinds of things like that. And backwards compatibility, because we don't break backwards compatibility in Symfony, we always deprecate things and give you an upgrade path, is the most difficult thing right now for making those changes. So I hope that Flex will help that in some ways. Those real fundamental changes are difficult, but at least with Flex, we can give you a really nice security.yml file with lots of comments on it, better than we've given them in the past. And also, I'm hoping, again, that we can basically recreate the Symfony generator so that you can use the generator to give you basic setups. It would be really nice if you could basically say, generate me a JWT, JSON Web Token, API authentication system, and it created the configuration in the class for you, and then you can just change it. Or generate me a login form system, and it generated the controller and the templates and the stuff you needed for that, and then you can just extend it from there. Because I think if we give you 90% of what you need, and then you just need to tweak it and customize it for your use case, that's actually pretty easy. If you need to figure it out from scratch, very, very difficult. Yeah. So yeah, that was probably a longer answer than you expected. History of Symfony. Other questions? Yes?
So now that we don't have bundles, how do you suggest we organize our files if we have a bigger? So for example, if we have a lot of controllers, if we put it all in the same directory, it will get really messy.
What do you have multiple bundles now? Yeah. Then if you want to have multiple directories, so you
like controllers and then subdirectories.
I would recommend src/controller and then subdirectories. Okay. But if you don't like that, then you can still have src/admin/controller, src/something/controller. We removed that or we stopped recommending that way because for many users it was confusing to wonder where is my controller, which directory is it in, which bundle is it in that case. But really, you could just basically take the word bundle off of your directories and you'd be fine. But I would recommend doing it the other way. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Actually, there was a lot of talks, mostly in the last few years, when the trend was like going down about decoupling.
Oh, decoupling the framework.
What do you think about it?
Decoupling from the framework is crap. I'm probably going to offend some people.
I agree with you, but
So, your controller should be entirely coupled to your framework. And then if you want, all of your other classes can be decoupled, meaning your service classes can be decoupled. Which mostly just means using interfaces. I don't like adding even more layers. So yeah, for the most part, I think it's too much. And actually, one of the guys that talked about that most in the Symfony world, Matthias Novak, even he has said, I've come back a bit, and I think that there are certain cases where you should couple yourself to the framework, and a good example is your controller should be coupled to your framework. Your console commands, which are basically controllers in the console area, should be coupled, and then you should just use interfaces and type hints everywhere else. But yeah, man, people waste so much time adding those layers. And they actually make your code more confusing. So sometimes I do code review, and one of the most common, it's subjective, one of the most common mistakes I see is that people create many interfaces in their own code. So now I see like interfaces type hinted everywhere, and it makes it harder to follow my code because I click into that interface to see what the code is, and I see an interface. Then I need to do more work to see what the class is. There are reasons that third-party libraries have interfaces so that we can use whatever implementation we want in them. But in my code, if I'm only going to have one class, if I'm only creating one class, just use the class. By adding an interface and then only ever having one class implement that interface, it just adds misdirection to your code. So there's a cost to those interfaces. The first thing I say is delete all the interfaces, and then suddenly your code will make more sense. Yeah. Did anyone want to disagree with me? It's totally valid. I tend to be on the more pragmatic side of things. Cool. Awesome. If you have more questions, I'll be here for a bit hanging out. And thank you guys very, very much for having me. This was awesome. Especially on short notice. 2 days. So thank you. And then the pizza arrived. Like he was waiting.